As a survivor of spiritual abuse, have you ever heard of the term covering theology or otherwise known as covering? Well, in this video, I'm going to talk about my views on it and why I believe that this theology is very heavily connected to spiritual abuse. So first off, what is covering theology or what is covering? It goes by different names. I'm sure that if you have heard of this, you might have just heard of it simply as covering or spiritual covering, right? And so you might have been in a spiritual environment where they talked a lot about this. Um, I'm coming at it from the perspective of a spiritual covering, meaning a person that is designated to be a spiritual covering over somebody else. And so somebody might say something along the lines of, well, I'm doing this, and Pastor so and so, or Sister so and so, or whoever is my spiritual covering. Now, I have a lot of concerns about this theology. And the reason I do is not necessarily because of the name, but what it implies and what happens as a result of it. For those of you who have been like under this type of teaching, I really like to hear from you in the comments about what you understand it as. For me, I don't see anywhere like in the Bible to support that. I know that there are authorities that people have, but authority is also something that you choose to submit to. And the reason that I have an issue with the whole covering thing is because it's basically putting somebody else in charge of your life. And I have a problem with that. That kind of theology basically says that this person is supposed to hear from God on your behalf and let you know what God wants you to do. And I believe that everyone can, anybody, if they choose to, can choose to, do what they need to do so that they can be in a relationship with God and hear from God directly. I have misgivings about believing that only somebody else can hear from God for you. Now, spiritually abusive environments will often tell you that. They might not tell you that directly, but they'll imply it. And they might say things like either you're too sinful, you're not mature enough, you don't know about this enough, or whatever. And so there needs to be this person or this body that is over you to tell you what to do. And when I have talked to people who have been part of this, they get anxious sometimes about making big decisions because their spiritual covering hasn't said it's okay. So if they want to marry somebody, they have to check with their covering. If they want to make a big purchase, they have to check with their covering, things like that. And so basically what it does is it fosters dependence on somebody else instead of dependence on God. And the reason why this is especially harmful is that people who have been in relationships or settings before where there was abuse and where there was like a very strong domineering, controlling figure, they're more likely to like seek this out in a spiritual relationship. And so that's why it can be very hard to detect, because if you think about it, it sounds good. When people go to spiritual environments, they're going there because they want to do right. They don't want to make a mistake. They want to make sure, hey, am I making the right decision? And when we think about spirituality, it can be very vague. As far as I'm concerned, God really doesn't speak to people in audible voices today, right? And so, for the most part, it's not like you can just hear God tell you, hey, in an audible voice, do this or do that. Spirituality has a degree of nebulosity to it, vagueness, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, but when you are coming from a place specifically of trauma, of abuse, you're going to be wanting to seek that certainty. And that's okay. I'm not shaming you for that. As human beings, we all want certainty, right? if we could choose between certainty and uncertainty, we choose the certain thing, right? We like clarity, we like knowing what we're supposed to do. The problem is that when we put somebody else in that place of God or spiritual authority, that is where all kinds of abuse can happen. Nobody should have that strong of a level of control over somebody's life, especially another adult, right? One adult shouldn't have that much control over you to tell you this is what you have to do. And a lot of times when people are in these spiritually abusive environments, those lines between kind of like God and people can get blurred because the people that are speaking in the role of a spiritual authority are, for better or for worse, assumed to speak on behalf of God. And so you have to be very careful with that. Just when from what I've seen, the fallout of covering theology is just people being very afraid to make decisions for themselves. And then the person who is the covering, how objective are they, right? Can they truly be in a place where they can objectively tell you what to do? Maybe they can, maybe they can't. But the stories that I have heard and the things that I've seen, the person who is the so-called covering is oftentimes manipulating things for their own gain. People can do this romantically. Somebody could ask a covering, can I marry, should I marry this person? And they might say, oh no, they're a bad choice because they have either a romantic interest in that person or they feel like they're better suited for somebody else. And I know of instances where that's happened. Telling people, going to the covering and saying, well, should I buy this car? Should I move here? That person could be jealous or envious of you. So they might see that you have an opportunity to advance and they might tell you, no, don't do it. Or it's bad because they don't want to see you rise above them or do something that they want to do that they don't have the opportunity to do. So there's that human bias in there. And then also, I don't see anywhere where like if you believe in the Bible and you read the Bible, I don't see anywhere where anybody is given dominion over anybody else. Like if you read Genesis, God gave Adam dominion over the animals, but no human being is put on earth to control another human being. We have free will, right? God gave us free will, and God, respects people's free will. And so, for now to one person to give their free will over to someone else, to me, does not seem healthy or even spiritual or biblical. And I know some people are going to be like, well, what about authority? And there are people that are in authority over people. Yeah, there are people that are in authority, but that doesn't mean you have to obey that authority. You are choosing to obey that authority. Nobody can force you to obey the speed limit or to obey the law. There are people that choose to obey the law, and there are people that choose not to obey the law. And so when we think about this, going back to covering theology, I don't believe in anything related to spiritual coverings. And I would advise you that if you are in a situation where you are told that you have to run decisions by your spiritual covering, I would advise you to leave that environment. Um, there are, another thing that I want you to think about too is that even though they might not say this is a spiritual covering, they can act like it and they can use other words. And so I remember when I was in a very questionable, spiritually abusive, environment. I'm not saying I questioned whether it was spiritually abusive. It was. When I say questionable, there are questionable things about it. They never came out and said, we believe in coverings. I don't even think they use that word. What I do know is that I got in trouble because I made life decisions. I'll just leave it at I made certain life decisions. And the abusive environment that I was a part of didn't like that. And it got back to me from somebody. They were like, well, you shouldn't have done that. And I said, shouldn't have done what? Like, what are you talking about? And they said that this decision that I had made, I didn't ask them first. And I needed to basically make sure that if I'm trying to like think about how to, okay, so it was a move that I had made. And they said that because I didn't ask them that that was bad, and I should have made sure that there were other like branches of this place where I was going to move to. And that's ridiculous. Like you can move wherever you want. But the fact that I kind of got like what's the word I'm looking for? Not necessarily in trouble, because what are they going to do? But I made it clear that you have no power over me. You're not going to do anything to me. But they made it clear that that was wrong, that I did. And I know that they had like talked to somebody else, basically within the structure, and one person talked to somebody else, and then they talked to the thing about, I'm going to a little sidetrack here, but one thing about spiritually abusive environments that I don't like, and that's very harmful, is that they can be very indirect sometimes, and that causes a culture of fear. So imagine hearing that you are in trouble, but you're never told by the person that you are in trouble with. You hear it, like it gets leaked to somebody else. Well, that's pretty much what happened. And their rationale was, well, you should have checked with us to make sure, and that in this place, you don't make decisions without talking to us. So that's a huge red flag. So as you can see, they never used the word covering, but once it got out that I was leaving, they were like, well, you shouldn't do that, and you should have checked, and you should have made sure that, this person said it was okay. Um, so I want you to think about that in the environment that you're in. Do you get, if you make a decision, do you get chastised for that? Are people overly nosy? That's another thing about this environment, that they were very nosy. They kind of would act like they were making conversation, but it was really to like gather details about your life and tell, the person or people in charge. So anyway, that's my take on covering theology. I don't see that there's anything helpful about it now. In terms of asking for advice, can you ask for advice? Absolutely. I think it's good and helpful to ask for advice, but from people that you trust. And it's also important too that when you ask for advice from that person, look at how they respond. Like, do they give you the permission? And it's not like you need the permission, but do they act in such a way where, like, hey, this is your decision, this is just my take on it? Or do they take ownership, like, you better do what I say? That's another red flag. And these environments, basically, by this whole spiritual covering sort of thing, it really decreases people's confidence in hearing from God for themselves and making decisions for themselves. A lot of these environments will try to scare you into believing that there's like one right decision and then there's one wrong decision. So if you don't do this thing, then it's the wrong thing and your life is going to be messed up. And that's another way of controlling through fear. So keep that in mind. Keep in mind too that when you are making decisions too, a general practice that I would advise you to do is to don't get too many people involved. A lot of these environments, they kind of think that they have ownership over what you do. If you're thinking about a decision, reflect on it, do what you need to do privately first, and then pull in a few trusted people and see how that works out, instead of just telling everybody and letting everybody have a say. So I'd like to hear from you all in the comments. What has been your experience with this covering theology or spiritual coverings or whatnot? How has that been applied? And have you been harmed by it? And if so, how? And then how did you, push back against that if you did? What advice would you have from other people? I really want to create a community here where all of you can share with each other what you've learned over time, and what advice you'd have for one another. Again, in any environment that you're in, I want you to build the confidence that you have autonomy, you have agency. No matter how messed up you think you are, how many messed up, decisions you've made, you still have autonomy. You're still an independent person, and approach things from that decision, not like I need somebody to tell me what to do. okay? I know that can be hard, especially if you've come from, other abusive environments or relationships. It's something that it's a skill that will grow over time. Okay. So that's all I have to say about that. I appreciate your viewership. If you find this information helpful, please like, comment, and share. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. If you'd like to book a consultation with me, you can go to my website, skillsetcounseling.com. All right. I hope you have a wonderful day that is filled with peace. Bye-bye.